Good afternoon, everyone. We will begin with the Refuge and Bodhichitta prayers as usual. O Sangye Chedan Soge Chonam La Chancho Bardo Dane Chapsum Che Dage Jenso Kipe Sunam Jidrola Penjir Sanje Drobar Sho Sangye Chedan Soge Chonam La Chancho Bado Dane Chapsum Che Dage Jinso Yibe Sunam Jidrola Penjir Sanje Drobar Sho Sangye Chedan Tsoge Chonam La Chancho Bardo Dane Chapsum Je Dage Jenso Gibe Sanam Jidrola Penjir Sanje Drobar Sho Semje Tamje Dewa Tan Dewe Judan Dembar Jurje Donga Dan Donga Judan Rawa Jurje Donga Mebe Dewa Tamba Tan Minralwa Jurje Nyeren Shadan Itan Ralwe Damnyon Shembola Neba Jurche. In the Dharma Expanse Palace of Akanishta is the essence of all Buddhas of the three times, who shows me directly my mind is Dharmakaya. I prostrate to the glorious exalted Gurus. Please bless me and all sentient beings that our minds become the Dharma. Please bless us that the Dharma become the path. Please bless us that the path dispel confusion. Please bless us that confusion arise as wisdom. Now think to yourself that we must bring all of our mothers, all sentient beings throughout space to the state of completely perfect Buddhahood. And for that reason, we must achieve Buddhahood ourselves. In order to achieve Buddhahood, we have to listen to, contemplate, and meditate upon the Dharma. And the first of these steps is listening. So when we listen to the Dharma, we should have this motivation of bodhicitta. And the Dharma that we are listening to is the verses on the Treasury of Abhidharma by Vasubandhu, as explained by the Ninth Karmapa Wangchuk Dorje in his commentary, Youthful Play. And in this commentary, there are 4 chapters. There are 8 chapters, and we are discussing the fourth area, teachings on karma. This chapter begins with a discussion of how everything arises from karma. Then there is a long passage on the understanding of karma, and finally a teaching of synonyms as an overview. In the middle, there is the identification of karma, the presentation of karma, and then the meaning of karma as explained in the sutras. We're discussing the last. This has 2 parts, general teachings and specific teachings. We have completed the general explanations when we are talking about in the specific teachings. And within the specific explanations, there is the explanation of the 3 obscurations to discard, the explanation of the 3 bases of meritorious action to rely upon or to do, and the explanation of the 3 virtuous precursors. And so we are in the first of these, the explanation of the 3 obscurations to discard, which has 3 parts, in essence, of the 3 obscurations, which obscurations are where, and finally explaining karmic obscurations in particular. And so yesterday we went through the first 2, and we got to the point of the 3rd, and we had a long digression. And people have been asking me, where do these stories come from? They are all preserved in the words of the Buddha. If you read the sutras, you will come across them. Of course, most of the sutras are not available in English yet. In particular, there are quite a few that are in the Vinaya scriptures. There are 13 volumes of the Vinaya that are preserved in Tibetan. And one of the things about the Tibetan Vinaya is that it keeps all of the history of all of the events in great detail. In other traditions, they separated out all the histories and put them in separate books. And so you can actually find these same histories recorded in the Pali traditions. There is a biographical dictionary of Buddhist persons, I don't remember the name of it, that you can find in English that has many of these stories if you want to find them. But in Tibetan, they're all just mixed right in the Vinaya itself. So, for example, in the Vinayavastu, which you could translate as the topics of the Vinaya. In the Vinayavastu, there are 17 sections, and one of those is the section about the schism. And it is a very long section, not because there's a whole lot about the schism itself, but because it has like the entire history from the beginning of the world until up through the schism and beyond. So it's long. And the other thing is that, yesterday as I was going through and relating the story, after every event there would be something where the monks would have doubts, or the bhikshus would have doubts, and as always when they'd have doubts, they'd go and ask the Buddha, and the Buddha would tell them the story of previous lives of the people involved, and sometimes 5 or 6 stories. So it makes it, when you're reading the stories, you have to kind of, it's actually wonderful to read the whole thing all the way through, but to really follow the thread of the story, there are lots of digressions. It's even worse than my teachings. Okay. And so that's basically where that story comes from. That, in particular, it comes from the fourth volume of the Vinayavastu as preserved in Tibetan. Now, I also had some questions. I also received some questions. I don't have these questions. The questioner has the questions. I don't know if I have good answers, but I'll try. The questioner writes, I found most of the section on which karma brings how many results difficult to grasp. You aren't the only one. While 3 of the 5 types of results I've studied in other contexts, the 2 of personal result and the result of removal were completely new to me. You didn't study last year. You should have come to Namo Buddha. But you didn't, so anyways, you had work. I know who it is, so he had a job, so he couldn't come. The personal result sounds like an immediate result of an action and that can occur at the same time or immediately after an action. That is exactly right. That is not how we usually think of karmic results, which are typically experienced in future lives. Can you review the meaning of personal result along with the meaning of the Tibetan terms? Okay, so for this question, we've got the general results of karma as we generally talk about them. We talk about the fully ripened result. We've got the dominant result and the compatible result that we discussed the other day, and I think that's fairly common. It's relatively easy to understand. However, in the Abhidharma, we also talk about 5 different types of results that are discussed in the 5th chapter, which include these 3 types of results, plus the personal result and the result of removal. Now, with the 3 types of results, when we talk about them in terms of karmic results, like the previous section when you're talking about the ripening of an action, the dominant result as being like the external environment, and then the personal result, the compatible result means like something similar happening to you. Those aren't quite the same as the characteristics that are given in the 2nd chapter, so they're a little bit different. So in the 2nd chapter, what we're talking about is instead of talking about what we could loosely term the karmic results, we're talking about just the results of the phenomena. Every phenomena has results. Every composite phenomena bears results, and those results come in 5 different types. So if something is composite, it's a cause, and it's going to produce 5 different types of results, up to 5 different types of results. The result of full ripening is clear. The dominant result is any composite that does not arise previous to it. So that's kind of a broad category. Then you have the a compatible result, which is a little bit different. The compatible result means things that come out of it that are of the same class, same level, and so forth. So, for example, if you have an afflicted thought of the desire realm, then that leads to, if there is followed by another afflicted thought of the desire realm, that second afflicted result of the afflicted thought of the desire realm would be like a causally compatible result, because it's the same class, same level, and so forth. So that's a slightly different definition. Then there's the result of removal, which is basically when you have a path of a path that eliminates obscurations or eliminates afflictions. Then the afflictions are gone, so they're removed. That removal itself is not composite; it's a cessation. But we call it a result of removal because we talk about results of the path. So essentially, that's what we're talking about. So the one that the questioner is asking about is the personal result, which in Tibetan is called the Khebu Cheje. Khebu as in person, Chepa as in doing, Khebu Cheje. Or in Sanskrit, the Purushakara Pala. So this personal result, Khebu or person means like an sentient being. Kara, or chepa, means to do. So like the result of the person doing something. So that's literally what it means, but it also applies to other things than just sentient beings. We can talk about anything that by its own power produces a result as being like a personal result. So, for example, when we have this year's favorite example of wringing the neck of a chicken and killing it, one of the personal results of that is the carcass of a chicken, right? That's a personal, it comes out of the action, right? It's produced by the action of killing. So that would be like the personal result of that. So that wouldn't be a karmic result per se. But basically, it's anything that comes out of the power of something. If you have a falling apple and it hits Newton on the head, the bruise is a personal result, right? So that's the personal result. It's not necessarily a karmic sort of result. So this is kind of the main point about this is that we're looking at karmic cause we're looking at cause and result on two levels. The first is in terms of the karmic, and then we think about it primarily in terms of the three that you're familiar with. The other way is sort of technical in terms of just the action is a composite phenomenon, therefore it has up to 5 results. So that's the first question. And then the other question is about the absorption of cessation, an arhat's absorption of cessation, and the conception-free absorption. What are these two? Now, these two are also described in the 2nd chapter. So another reason why you should have come to Namo Buddha last year. But you didn't. Okay. So the absorption of cessation is when an arhat, not all arhats, but most arhats, when they have the ability to do good meditation, then they can enter this most subtle of meditations when they have achieved the level of arhatship. So this is someone who has not only eliminated all the afflictive obscurations, they also have really good meditation. And so then they're able to enter this absorption of cessation, which is kind of like resting. You do the various types of meditation to exercise them. This is why non-returners and why arhats will do things like skipping meditation or alternating meditation. It's not like you necessarily, you've got to keep your, what do you say? If you're talking about playing a musical instrument, you say you got to have your chops. You got to have your meditation chops. You do these meditations sometimes for that. Sometimes you do it in order to rest and so forth. So that's that. And it is undefiled. So the absorption of cessation is an undefiled meditation of the arhats. Conception-free meditation comes off of the 4th dhyana. And so it is a non-Buddhist meditation where they go from the 4th dhyana into the conception-free absorption. And so this is similar in that it is also free of mind and mental factors. But it's different in that it is defiled. Now, the other thing is that even though there is no mind and mental factors, it is still virtuous. And why do we say it is virtuous? Because it has a fully ripened result, birth in the conception-free realm. Right? So it's defiled, it produces birth. That's a big difference between the conception-free absorption and the absorption of cessation. The questioner also writes, the fourth jhana is considered the greatest and most subtle of the four jhanas, but it seems to be a dead end, so to speak. Well, yes and no. I mean, when you're doing the practices of the sutras, it's actually a very powerful, very important meditation to do. It is one of the meditations that you use to eliminate afflictions that tie you to various realms. Now, to become an arhat, you don't necessarily have to do the fourth practice, achieve the fourth jhana meditation. But if you want to be like a Buddha, yes, you do have to do it according to the sutras. You have to have that level of control over your mind. So it depends on the type of arhat that you're going to eventually end up being, whether you're going to be one who is eliminated merely through liberated through prajna, or liberated through both prajna and the strength of your meditation. So that is why one would practice the fourth jhana. Okay. So now we have come to our text, and so we are on the section on explaining karmic obscurations in particular. This is on page 367 of the book or PDF, and if you are looking at the ebook, then you can search for and go to verse 98 of the of chapter 4. So the explaining karmic obscurations in particular has two topics, the heinous deeds and the near heinous deeds. So let's review what the three types of obscurations are. There are karmic obscurations, there are afflicted obscurations, and there are obscurations of full ripening. So karmic obscurations are the heinous deeds, right? So the karmic obscurations prevent you from, make it impossible for you to achieve the noble path. The afflicted obscurations are when you have continual afflictions that, again, make it impossible. They're so constant that you have no gap, no way that you can practice, and therefore they prevent you from achieving the noble path. The obscuration of full ripening is when you're born in a place where there's just no way you can achieve the noble path, such as the realm of concept-free, or such as the northern continent of Uttarakura, or unpleasant sound, or the three lower realms. So there's just no chance. So we're talking about the karmic obscurations in particular, and the heinous deeds are the actual karmic obscurations, and then they're throwing in the near heinous deeds because it kind of fits, even though they're not really the karmic obscurations. The heinous deeds have three topics: the actual heinous karma, its karma and result, and then additional points on karma and result. So those are the three topics. And of the first, actual heinous karma has an extensive explanation of the heinous deeds of creating a schism, and the second is explaining all five heinous deeds together. So we're talking about the first, the heinous deed of creating a schism. And this has three topics: the essence, its result, explaining it in terms of its aspects. So the essence has two topics: the schism that is the division, and the schism that is that which divides. So the schism that is the division. So here, what we're talking about is what actually is a schism of the Sangha. What do we mean when we say a schism? So it says here in verse 98, the essence. So the schism that is division has 2 points, the essence and who possesses it. A schism of the Sangha is discord by nature, non-concurrent. It's not afflicted, it is neutral. So schism of the Sangha is a dharma, that is a phenomena, that is discord between two camps of the Sangha by its nature. So we had the situation in the story, in the history I should say, where the bhikshus who had been staying, the bhikshus who were ordinary sentient beings left with Devadatta to go off and be in his camp. Then there was discord between them, and the remaining members of the Sangha. So that's discord in nature, right? Now, what is that discord? It is substantially existent and non-concurrent with mind. So that there is something there. So this is where we have with the great exposition, we have what are called non-concurrent formations. So non-concurrent formations are basically things that you kind of think must exist, but you don't really know what else to call them, basically. They're not really form or anything like that. So this includes things like words, names, and so forth. It includes arising, ceasing, cause of enduring, aging, and so forth. It includes attainment and non-attainment, all of which we've spoken about over the past few weeks. So there also is this non-concurrent formation called a schism. So it's like there's something going on. So that's what it is. It is not afflicted. So it's something, and it's neutral. So it's neither good nor bad, the schism of the Sangha. So this is kind of so what we're talking about is that discord in between the two types of Sangha. We're not talking about the person making the discord. We're not talking about how he made the discord. We're talking about the result of that person's action, which is that there's disagreement or discord between the two camps of the Sangha. And so that is kind of neutral. So it is substantially existent and non-concurrent with mind. When we say it's non-concurrent, that means that it's not really material, it's not a mental factor, it's kind of some other category of phenomena, but it is composite. Because it is not afflicted and not virtuous, it is unobscured neutral, so it is not a heinous karma. In other words, the effect of what this is saying is that the heinous karma doesn't belong to the people who are split by the affliction, or by the schism. So you've got the group who went off with Devadatta, you've got the group who stayed with the Buddha. They all had the schism, the entire Sangha had the schism, but they didn't have the heinous karma. So who has the schism is the next question. So who possesses it? The Sangha does possess the schism. The Sangha does possess the schism, but the schismatic Devadatta does not. Okay, so the discord is something that the two camps have, but the schismatic, the person who created the Sangha, doesn't have it. Devadatta didn't have it. So Devadatta was sitting there feeling pretty proud of himself. He had this wide group of people sitting, and he was imitating the Buddha with his two people on either side, and he's feeling chuff, and then everyone else is there sitting around. He didn't have the schism. He created it, but they had the schism. Okay? So that's an important thing. So when we're talking about the heinous act, we don't mean the schism itself. The schism that is that which divides. So there's the making of the schism. So this has 2 points. The essence, the unwholesome act is telling lies. The perceptible and imperceptible unwholesome act of speech of the schism is telling lies. So it was Devadatta's act of telling the lies that created the schism. That is the heinous karma, telling the lies that created the schism, telling them, come with me, I'll take care of you, I'll make sure that you have everything you need. He couldn't do that. He can't give them liberation. He could maybe arrange food and clothing, but that's about it. So there is the imperceptible there. There is both the perceptible and the imperceptible aspects of it, because there's the imperceptible that started when he began the preparations for it, and then there was also the perceptible act of the actual lies that convinced the members of the Sangha to come with him. So who has this? It is the schismatic who has it. It is possessed by the schismatic. So the lie, is possessed by the schismatic Devadatta who split the Sangha. So that lie is Devadatta's. In other words, he has the perceptible and the imperceptible karma that led to it. Now, when we think about the perceptible and the imperceptible karma, it is the perceptible karma of the actual lie that is the heinous act. The imperceptible is, of course, bad, but it's not. It's the actual lie that is the heinous act. And so what is the what is the result of this? It ripens for an eon in incessant. So the result of this is that the schismatic will spend an eon, the longest length of time that you can live in the desire realm, in the incessant hell. So it ripens for the schismatic of the wheel an entire intermediate eon in the incessant hell, because there is no longer lifespan than that in the desire realm. The schismatic of the wheel, there are actually different types of schism. So in particular, when we are talking about this schism that is a heinous action, the one that we mean is what we call a schism of the wheel. And this term is described, not described below, but I might as well introduce it here anyways. A schism of the wheel is when the Dharma wheel of the Buddha is broken. And this only really happens at a time when there is a Buddha present in the world, because someone like Devadatta can only rival the Buddha when there's a Buddha to be rivaled. When the Buddha has passed away, then someone else can come and try to do all these things, but it's not the same as like Devadatta trying to rival the Buddha. So that's what we mean by a schism of the wheel. The other heinous deeds are not definitely destined for the incessant. So if you kill your mother, father, an arhat, or draw blood from the Buddha with a malicious intent, then those four do not necessarily ripen in the incessant hell. They can ripen in any of the other hells. They're not necessarily the incessant. In other talks, in other sources, you read about heinous acts always ripening in the incessant hell. Here in this presentation, it is given as as only the schism resulting in the incessant hell. And the reason is actually that the schism is worse than the others because it affects more people and it affects them more negatively. Because while there is a schism, because the wheel of the Dharma is broken, then no one can achieve the noble paths. Because of that discord, the breaking of the Sangha, the breaking of the wheel of the Dharma, even if people spent that night trying to achieve the various results, they wouldn't be able to because of that discord. And so that makes it an even heavier wrong than killing your own mother. Then the next line says, well, it ripens for an eon in incessant, but then you think, well, let's think about Devadatta. What did he do? Okay. He had plenty of lies along the way, and he did plenty of nefarious things, but you've got to pick out the worst things that he did were what? They were trying to kill the Buddha by catapulting rocks at him. The second was what? So the first one was that. Then there was letting the elephant loose. Then there was causing the schism. And then there was murdering the arhat, the bhikshuni utpalevarna. Well, these are four bad things. Twice he tried to kill the Buddha. The second time he didn't quite manage to get himself a second, what do we say, causal heinous deed of drawing blood, because the Buddha managed to tame the elephant. So he has 3 heinous acts. So does that mean that he just gets one punishment for all 3? Well, first of all, they're not really punishments. They're actually just kind of different ripenings. And so the point, they all have to ripen in that same next lifetime. And the way they happen is that additional bring additional pain. Additional heinous deeds make additional pain in hell for each subsequent deed. If heinous karma cannot be experienced in other lifetimes and must be experienced on rebirth only, how can the results of multiple heinous karmas ripen on someone who has committed several, such as Devadatta? Multiple additional heinous karmas bring 2, 3, 4, or 5 times as much suffering, depending upon how many you have done. The being is born with a huge body that has especially tender flesh, so they experience an immense amount of extremely unbearable additional pain. So after Devadatta had tried to poison the Buddha by by putting poison on his flesh and rubbing the Buddha's feet, and then he fell into the incessant hell. As he was falling down, his brother Ananda couldn't bear to see his brother Devadatta. Even though Devadatta was a schismatic, Ananda still loved him. And he said, Devadatta, take refuge in the Buddha. And Devadatta, even though he had cut the roots of virtue, he saw what was happening and why it was happening. And he restored the roots of virtue, and he said, now I go for refuge to the Buddha with all my heart. I really do see it. I go for refuge to the Buddha. And then he fell into the incessant hell. And the Buddha then made the prediction that Devadatta, after his lifetime in the incessant hell, would then awaken to enlightenment as a Pratyeka Buddha, because of the virtue of going for refuge to the Buddha at that point, really going for refuge from the bottom of his heart. It's like he really seeing the suffering of samsara, truly going for refuge. And the result of that is that he would achieve the result of becoming a Pratyeka Buddha in the future. See, it's not like retributive justice where you have done bad and thou shalt suffer forevermore. It is like, no matter how bad you've done, you've still got a chance. You might have some difficulties in the interim, but you've still got a chance. So Devadatta restored the roots of virtue, went for refuge, and was going to achieve the result of being a Pratyeka Buddha, but he still fell into the incessant hell. So Maudgalyana and Shariputra were, how do we say this? To put it the way it's expressed in the Vinaya in contemporary terms, they had a kind of, one of their pastimes was to go down into the hells and to see what was going on down there. They just would go by miraculous powers down to the hells. So they went down to the incessant hell. And Maudgalyana, by the power of his miracles, made great oceans of water come and put out all the fires and actually give some relief to all these beings in the hell. And they said, Devadatta, where are you? Come here. So Devadatta comes. And he speaks to them. And they say, well, what's happening with you, basically? He said, well, Devadatta said, well, there are these huge mountains of burning, blazing, flaming mountains that come and they crush me and they grind me to dust. And then at the same time, there are also these big elephant-like creatures that come and stomp all over me. And then there are these huge saws that come and cut me into pieces. All of this just kept happening over and over again. And so Shariputra says to him, the mountains, the blazing mountains crushing you and pulverizing you is the result of shooting the rocks at the Buddha. The saws cutting you in pieces is the result of the schism. And being crushed by the elephant-like creatures is a result of letting the elephant loose. Oh, and then the fourth one. Then there are also people with huge blazing hammers who smash him and grind him as if you were sesame seeds. And so that was the result of killing the Arhat Utpalivarna. So those are the four different intense sufferings that he experienced. So he had these four different types of suffering that he experienced. So I'm not sure, so at any rate, where did we go? I lost my page. There we are. Explaining it in terms of its aspects. So this is going back to the heinous deed of creating a schism. So if we take a look at the schism, we say it has three different topics here. It's the aspect of the schism of the wheel, explaining a ritual schism, that's the other type of schism, and then identifying times when a schism of the wheel does not arise. So the aspects of the schism of a wheel, there are 8 points here. Who is the schismatic, where the schism occurs, who is divided, what they're divided by, how long it lasts, explanation of the term, which continents it is on, and the number of bhikkhus involved. So who is the schismatic? So who actually is, what this question is, who is actually able to create a schism in the Sangha? It is a bhikshu acting upon views, who is disciplined and divides. So a bhikshu acting on views. So what this means is that someone who has really stable, who's acting out of personality view or wrong views or so forth, because these are pretty stable, can get really entrenched. And because they're different, if you're just acting out of cravings, craving is not so stable. But when you've got a view behind it, when you're acting out of a view, then it's much more stable. So that's why it says acting out of views, because we can see this from the story of Devadatta. It's like he was intent on this for a long time. He was trying for a very long time. If you were just doing it because you, out of craving, you wouldn't be able to keep it up over years like that. So someone who is disciplined. So this means someone who on the outside at least looks like they're disciplined. Someone who is able, because you have to have a bhikshu who is able who is actually able to inspire people to follow them. If you have someone who's kind of ragtag, if you had one of the members of the group of 6, everyone would laugh at him. But you've got Devadatta, who from outside appearances, like in the story where after he's caused the schism, Devadatta goes and sits in a tree under a tree as if he was in meditation, and everything's well, he couldn't have done that, right? So it's similar. Excuse me, that was not after the schism, after he tried to kill the Buddha the first time. The schism is perpetrated by a bhikshu. Okay, so it has to be a member of the Sangha and not by a householder who would not be an equal in the body of bhikshus that is divided. So if it's not someone who's in the body of bhikshus, the bhikshus are not going to listen. The bhikshus are not going to try to follow a householder. Or a bhikshuni and so forth, who would not have such power over persuasion over the bhikshus. The bhikshu who creates the schism acts upon and enters into the 5 views of personality view and so forth. So personality view, that's the idea of looking at themselves, looking at their aggregates and having the idea of a me or mine. Then there's extreme view, which would be either an eternalist or nihilist view, or the view of the view of overesteeming the view, overesteeming overesteeming view, overesteeming austerities and so forth, and then also the wrong view. So those are the 5 types of views. So they have one or more of those views. So only such a one can uphold another teacher or path through his ability to analyze and discern, because he is ensnared in stable, wicked intentions. So they have stable intentions. As I said, if it's craving, it's not going to be stable. And they've got to be kind of intelligent enough and able to convince people that they're going to be another teacher. They can make a decent pretense of being it that's going to actually convince childish people. So it is not someone who acts out of craving, because such a person does not have stable attentions towards the all-afflicted and utterly pure. In other words, the all-afflicted basically means everything in samsara. The utterly pure means the path and nirvana. If you're acting out of craving, you don't have such clear intentions towards samsara and nirvana, in other words. So bhikshu who is disciplined divides the Sangha. Someone with a weak discipline does not have enough power behind his words to be able to create a schism. So someone who always misbehaves, no one's going to listen to them. It's got to be someone who's seems really good on the outside to be able to draw them away. Where the schism occurs, elsewhere. Elsewhere means where the Buddha isn't. Elsewhere than where the Buddha is. The schism happens elsewhere than where the Bhagavan actually is. like in the story. The Buddha was staying a little ways away in a retreat and not coming out and not speaking to people, right? And so the schism could happen when the Buddha was not there. If the Buddha had actually been there, people would have looked at the Buddha, they'd looked at Devadatta and said, okay, the Buddha. Most of them. I mean, okay, there are Devadatta's 4 followers, but because it is difficult to overcome his splendor and his words are potent, it is not possible to create a schism where he actually resides. So if the Buddha had actually been there, then he then the schism could not have happened. Which is an interesting question. Why then did it happen? The reason it happened is because of the Buddha's karma. Schisms do not happen, according to the Great Exposition. The Mahayana, we wouldn't accept that. But in the Great Exposition, this is how we explain it. The Buddha, in a previous lifetime, had created a schism among the followers of a sage. And the result of this is that when he achieved Buddhahood, he also had a schism among his followers. So this does not happen to all Buddhas. It happened to the Buddha Shakyamuni for this reason, but it does not happen to all of the Buddhas. So who is actually divided? Childish. So childish here refers to the individuals in the Sangha who are taken. And childish is a synonym for ordinary individuals who are like children because they just don't know what's right and what's wrong. They're childish. Only childish, ordinary beings can be divided. Aryans, that is, the nobles who stream enterers and so forth, the people who have actually seen the truth, the nature of the 4 Noble Truths, cannot divide it because they have directly perceived the dharmas of scripture and realization, and because they have undivided faith. It's like obvious to them. It's like totally obvious. They've seen the truth, and they can see right through what Devadatta is doing. They know that what the Buddha is saying is correct, and so there's just like no question for the noble individuals. It's only the childish, ordinary individuals. Accepting other teachers and paths divides. So accepting other teachers than the Tathagata and paths other than the one he taught, such as the 5 bases of not drinking milk, not eating meat, not using salt, wearing uncut robes, and staying in monasteries and towns, is enough to divide the Sangha. So it's in the story. In here I have a little bit of a doubt. Now it may be that there are different versions of the story than just the one that is recorded in the Vinaya. In the Vinaya, it was that Devadatta said, "Come, follow me. Let me be your teacher, and I'll arrange all the food and clothing that you want." It was the middle of a famine, right? And so all the hungry bhikshus who hadn't had much to eat for several months, they followed their stomachs and they followed Devadatta. They took him as a teacher for that reason. So according to the story, after that event and everything went wrong, Devadatta was actually, I didn't tell these details yesterday, so I have to tell them today. Devadatta was really distraught because he realized that he had committed 3 heinous acts and that he was destined for hell. And he was just inconsolable. And then there came by the non-Buddhist teacher Dzogchen, which is probably Purdanima Kashyapa, I think is his name in Sanskrit, but don't quote me on that. At any rate, he was a non-Buddhist, materialist teacher who had a really strong nihilistic view. And he said, "Why are you upset? This isn't going to ripen as anything. When you're dead, you're dead. There's no ripening of karma. You didn't come from another lifetime and be reborn here. You're not going to go anywhere in the next life. When you're dead, you're done. There's nothing else. You get over it," basically. And at that point, Devadatta developed that wrong view, that nihilistic view that there is no past and future lives. And then he continued, and among his 4 followers, at least Kokalika continued to follow him. And then at that point, he made these 5 rules that his followers would not drink milk, not eat meat, not use salt, wear uncut robes, and stay in monasteries and towns. Unlike the Sangha of the Bhagwan, where they ate whatever they're given, and they would eat salt, and they could wear cut robes, and they would stay in monasteries outside of town. So he's kind of trying to do things different, and trying to make it a little bit more ascetic, to make himself look a little bit bigger. So that's where those come from. So it's so I'm not clear that, because in the Vinaya history that happens after the Sangha. Or another possibility is that actually the Vinaya, the chronology is really unclear. It's really totally unclear what happens when, because as I said yesterday, they didn't date things. They didn't even have a universal system of dating things, you know. So you can't say in the year 639 BC this happened. You can't say that. But that's an area that will need more research in the future. And I'm not sure if I'm going to be researching it or if someone else will. Okay. So how long does it last? It does not last. It doesn't take a long time. It doesn't take long for the Sangha to be healed. The schism, does not last longer than from sundown to sunup, because the Sangha will definitely be reunited before daybreak. Because what happens? You have your supreme pair. You've got the Madhgalyana and Shariputra who come by and save the day, pretty much. Come by and get all the bhikshus to come back. You also have a Devadatta feeling totally complacent and going to sleep and snoring away while the whole thing is happening. So it's called a schism of the wheel. So schism of the wheel, so here, this schism of the Sangha is called a schism of the wheel because it breaks the Dharma wheel of the Tathagata and creates an obstacle to entering the path. So it creates an obstacle to entering the path, or to entering the path, or to achieving any new results on the path, and so forth. So it's breaking the wheel of Dharma. The wheel of Dharma is sometimes used is often used as a metaphor for the path of seeing, as is discussed in the 6th chapter, and also in the Sutra, The Turning the Wheel of Dharma. So when you break it, then no one can enter that path of seeing. No one can come in. Which continent it is on Rose Apple Land, because that's where the Buddha is. That's where the Bhagwan is. It happens in the Rose Apple Land, not the other continents, because there's no teacher there. So there's no rebellious person such as Devadatta who wishes to be the teacher's equal. So you try to create a schism on the Western Bountiful Cow, you can't. I mean, there's no Buddha there. The Buddha's in the Rose Apple Land, so you need to be where the Buddha is to try to rival the Buddha. And the number of bhikshus involved, it's not less than 9. There have to be 9. So the reason is that you have a Sangha that's split in order to create 2 new Sanghas. Now, a Sangha has to have 4 bhikshus or bhikshunis. Minimum of 4. That's what makes a Sangha. In number, there are not less than 4 bhikshus on each side, and the schismatic in the middle, so it is completed by 9 or more. So you could have 4 people going off with the schismatic, or you could have hundreds of people going off with the schismatic, as actually happened. But this is like the minimum for the number of people who there have to be for a schism. So that is basically what we know about basically the features of the schism of the wheel. So a schism of the wheel is basically dividing the entire Sangha. breaking it all apart. And it can only happen at a time when there is a Buddha, where the Buddha is, or close enough to where the Buddha is. Not exactly where the Buddha is, but when there's someone who can actually rival the Buddha in order to actually create the division, right? Otherwise, if it happens at another time, then there can be discord in the Sangha, but it doesn't rise to the level of a schism of the wheel. And so that is what we call instead a ritual schism. Ritual schisms happen in 3 continents with at least 8. So ritual schisms are created by sowing discord among 2 groups who perform poshada and other rituals within a single boundary. So when you have a Sangha in a monastery of, at least 8, usually what happens in a monastery is you make sure very carefully, that you have to be very careful when you do the poshada, that is the sojong, the monastic sojong ritual, or any of the other actions of the Sangha, making decisions as a Sangha and so forth. There are various things, such as when you ordain bhikkhus or bhikkhunis, when you try to expel someone from a place, and when you're doing other actions of the Sangha, you have the whole Sangha come together, and they have to reach a decision by consensus. In other words, it has to be unanimous. Everyone has to show their assent. So what happens when you have a ritual Sangha is that instead of having just one group, one Sangha coming together and making the decisions together, they get in a fight with each other and they make 2 groups. Maybe they try to expel each other's members or something like that. They get into 2 groups, and then you have 2 groups within a single boundary. So that does not work. So that's a ritual schism. This is in any of the 3 continents where the teachings are. So anywhere where Buddhism flourishes, essentially, where the teachings are, where there is a Sangha. A Sangha here meaning a monastic Sangha. The ritual schism does not need a schismatic. In other words, you can just have the bhikkhus. You don't have to have someone who's trying to vie with the Buddha. You just have to have 2 groups within a single boundary that are not getting along. So it is completed with at least 4 bhikkhus on each side, or 8 or above, 8 or more. So, however many there are. So in terms of the types of schisms that we're talking about, the one that is a heinous karma is Devadatta's schism. Then historically, there have been many other sets of discord that have happened within the Sangha over history and the times when they've split. And these are what we call the ritual schism. So they're also bad. As the Gyalwang Karmapa has said on many, many occasions, it is said in the scriptures that what will cause Buddhism to decline is discord in the Sangha. So it is really important when we are members of the Sangha, the monastic Sangha, that we have to get along. It's like the most important thing. You have to be harmonious and disciplined. These are the 2 things that we talk about with the Sangha. The Sangha that is harmonious and disciplined. And it is really important to get along. This is one of the things that monks and nuns need to learn how to do, and it's not always so easy, especially for people who come in holding on to their own ideas. So we have to get along. We have to be, that's just the most important thing. Actually, even if you're not a member of the Sangha, even if you're a layperson, it's still incredibly important to get along. Getting along in practice is probably the most important thing we can do to make sure that our practice and the teachings and everything else goes well. If you take a look at it, just look at if you look at the short history of Dharma in Europe and North America, you'll see that there are some Dharma centers that are going fine and some that are not. And often there are some centers that are going fine until they have some sort of a big implosion because of disagreements over something, and then they just never get over it. Then there are others that just keep going and seem to do fine. So what they don't have those schisms. So it's like when you have these really wonderful groups that they split into different camps and they can't come together, then that just means that those teachings can't flourish. They just can't continue. And so this is like a really a big problem, because those teachings are necessary for certain people. You know, the different flavors of Dharma, and some people need a specific flavor. And so when that flavor is kind of poisoned by people disagreeing with each other or acting in or mixing worldly ways in with Dharma, or whatever it is that causes that leads to the disagreement, basically people holding on to the idea of I'm right and the other person is wrong. When you hold on to that, then the people who need that particular type of Dharma aren't going to be able to get it anymore. And this is a really huge problem for a lot of people, particularly in places where, you know, in the West, and where Dharma is relatively new. And then it also ends up giving Buddhism as a whole a bad name. Buddhists are hypocrites, they can't get along, and so forth. So it's really important. The most important thing we can do is get along with our Dharma brothers and sisters. Nothing more important than that, which means we have to accept that we're all human, we all have foibles. Not only do we have foibles, we have actual defects and faults. But when we are looking at each other as Dharma friends, the most important thing we can do is we have to be patient with each other, and we have to try to look at each other's qualities. When people have faults, why do people have faults? It's because they're ordinary individuals. Is there an ordinary individual who does not have faults? No, because that's the definition of being an ordinary individual. In fact, even when you're a first-level bodhisattva, do you have faults? Yes. So if first-level bodhisattvas have faults, what more? That says a whole lot about us. Of course we have faults. And as long as you have faults, they're occasionally going to come out and be expressed by you doing something stupid. And then, or by another person doing something stupid. So it's really important that we look at that. We recognize that they're ordinary people. And when we look at other people and see faults in them, actually we're really often just seeing our own projection of faults. We're not really seeing anything. We often really don't even know what's going on. We assume something is happening. We get this whole storyline going in our head, or we maybe talk with people and divide people into factions saying this is what's going on, when in fact you don't really know. This is, you know, so rather than looking at faults, we need to look for the qualities in other sentient beings. The Eighth Karmapa Wangchuk Dorje wrote in one of his, in the 100 Short Instructions, among one of those, he wrote that you should never look for faults. Instead, always look for other sentient beings' good qualities. And when you see a good quality in another sentient being, celebrate it, because it is even more rare to see a quality than to see a Buddha. So you have to try to look for the good things in other people and try to be beneficial. And if we can do this, it's most important that we get along. In general, within our Trangu Monastery and our Trangu Dharma centers, we generally get along very well. Of course, there are little problems here and there, but we keep together. We get along very well. And it's important for those of us who are involved in the Trangu monasteries and so forth to try to continue this. And it's important for, it's up to us, really. And it's also up to everyone else to really try to do what you can to make sure that you always get along with your Dharma brothers and sisters. So it's really, it's critical for you and your practice. It's critical in terms of bringing other people into Buddhism. There are lots of people who come to Dharma centers and then there's all sorts of squabbling and they get turned off and leave. Who does that help? So it's really important for Buddhism that we just get along. Okay. So now where are we at? We're at the top. Identifying times when a schism of the wheel does not arise. So when the Buddha was on Rajagir and it was time to get ready to go someplace for the rainy season retreat, the Yarne rainy season retreat, And he decided to send the noble beings someplace and take all the ordinary individuals down into Rajgir. At that point, he thought to himself, and he thought, it's my karma that a schism is going to happen. And so when can a schism possibly happen? And so this is what he says, basically what he said in the Vinaya at this time. And so it says there's 6, is it 5 or is it 6? What is it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 times. So at first or at end, before there are faults or a pair, or when the sage has passed. When boundaries are not established, a schism of the wheel can't happen. So at first. So when a Buddha first awakens to enlightenment and goes and teaches the Dharma, at the beginning, everyone is totally harmonious because they're so excited about the Dharma. It's like, wow, the Buddha's teaching all this stuff. It's fantastic. There's no way that a schism can happen then. At the end, when the Buddha passes away, then everyone is overcome by thoughts of impermanence and sorrow. And so at that point, they're all in agreement, and there's no way a schism can occur. Before there are faults, that is, before there are faults of discipline or views or a pair, such as Maudgalyana and Shariputra, or when a sage has passed away, because after the sage has passed away, there's no one to rival, or when boundaries are not established, a schism of the wheel can't happen. So these are the 6 times. So at first, it says in the commentary, immediately after the wheel of Dharma has been turned, everyone is happy, overjoyed, and harmonious. So, he's just taught the Dharma, and it's fantastic. And at the end, immediately after the parinirvana, when the Buddha has lain down between the Dushala trees and has achieved parinirvana, then everyone is focused on impermanence, and they're united in grief. So schisms do not arise at either of those 2 points because everyone has the same idea. So they're similar in that. Or in between. So between those 2 periods, before there are faults in shila or views, in other words, before anyone breaks any rules, or actually before anyone does something stupid and a rule is made. So what happened is after the Buddha awakened, then for the first 12 years of there being Buddhism, all the bhikkhus were just perfect. And then one did something bad, and a rule was made. And so that was a fault of discipline. And then sometime later, there are some who started arguing about things and saying, well, maybe that's not quite right. And so they had developed wrong views. And so that's a fault in view. So those are the 2 types of faults. Or before the one supreme pair who quickly reunite the Sangha appears. In other words, every Buddha who is going to have one bhikshu who is the greatest in prajna and one bhikshu who is the greatest in miracles. And so they're going to have someone like Shariputra and Maudgalyana. And so it's not going to happen before that pair appears, because it's that pair that reconciles the Sangha. Reunite or reconcile the Sangha. Or as there is no one to compete with when the sage has passed. So if the Buddha has already passed away, then Devadatta isn't going to rival anyone, because there's no one left to rival. As the schism is disunity within the boundaries of one monastery, when boundaries are not yet established. So at first in Buddhist history, initially the Buddha didn't make a big deal about boundaries. They're kind of natural boundaries, like boundaries of towns and so forth. But eventually, when they started working things out, they started formally setting boundaries within monasteries. So before those formal boundaries are established, then there cannot be a schism. So in these times, a schism of the wheel cannot happen. So those are the 6 times when the schisms of the wheel cannot happen. So that is the explanation of the heinous deed of a schism, and I think that is a good point to stop for today. So let us now please dedicate the virtue of teaching and listening to the Dharma, so that all sentient beings may achieve lasting happiness by whatever name you want to call it. And we call it Buddhahood. So that they may all achieve that. Until such time as they do, then they may be free of all the tribulations and sufferings of plague, famine, and war. That they may enter the path, and in particular, since we've been speaking about a schism today, that all sentient beings may enter the path and all be disciplined and harmonious, and that there may be no discord, no disagreements, no strife within any Sangha or within any Dharma organization, and that everyone may get along and all progress joyfully and harmoniously towards the ultimate result. Please, thinking in this way, let's recite the dedication of merit. Om, by this merit may we attain omniscience, defeat the enemy, wrongdoing, and free all wanderers from the ocean of existence, churned by great waves of birth, age, sickness, and death. Thank you.